Hi, welcome to the second in a series of beginner's guides to photography. This is a very basic course for technophobes who are just starting out with their first DSLR or mirrorless medium-sized camera with interchangeable lenses. Today I'm going to take you through what I think are the 5 most important lessons that you can quickly learn. Nothing too technical. In order to illustrate these points, because I don't have any willing models around at the moment, I will be taking photos of my cat Tubby. Some of you may have seen Tubby in the first video. So the first thing I did was I just went out with this Canon 550D entry-level DSLR. It's a good starting point for anybody who's trying to get into photography. You can pick one of these up in the UK for about £200 second hand. They are a good starting point. Nothing wrong with the photos from this at all. They're not quite up to the standard of the professional cameras, but they're a great learning tool, so it's the kind of thing that I would recommend you start out with. As I said in my previous video, it doesn't matter whether you go with Canon or Nikon or any of the other brands, just get yourself an entry-level DSLR like this. This one's 5 years old, but it shoots perfectly good photos, as you'll see. I'm going to start with the kit lens, which is the cheap nasty lens that tends to come with these cameras. So what I did was I just went out, cleared my mind of everything I know about photography, camera in full auto, kit lens, and I just walked outside and took a shot of Tubby, and this is what it looked like. Now you'll see from this image that it looks quite flat. It looks quite washed out. Part of the reason for that is, in fairness to the camera, the light was starting to fade that day. But additionally, the camera, because it was making all the decisions for me, it decided to pop up the flash, and it fired the built-in flash, which has made the image look, as I say, quite washed out. The other thing you'll note, if we zoom in now, you can see that the image is not particularly sharp. It's just overall not a particularly impressive image. I just went out, took the one shot, and this is what I got. Now, because this isn't a great lens, the first piece of advice I'm going to give, and these are not necessarily in order of importance, is to just go out and buy yourself one of these inexpensive 50mm prime lenses. This is the Canon f1.8 50mm, also known as the Nifty 50. They sell in the UK for about £71 at the moment. That's about $100, so it's not a big investment, and it's the only investment I'm going to suggest that you make in this video. Quick pluses and minuses of this lens. Positives, you'll get a much nicer looking image from this than you get from the kit lens. You get better sharpness, better contrast, better colour reproduction, and because it's a lens that's able to let in a lot of light, you'll have the ability to make your backgrounds blurred, as I'll illustrate in a minute. Downsides of this lens, it's not a zoom lens, so you are stuck with a fairly, to use non-technical terms, a fairly zoomed in image. You have to zoom with your feet. There'll be times when you'll feel like you want to get more in your shot and you just can't back up any further. It's not the best built lens. It's entirely plastic, including the mount on the bottom, which is unusual for a lens. If you drop this lens, it's likely to break. But it's a great starting lens, and it's one that I would highly recommend if you're just starting out. So I attached this 50mm lens, kept the camera in full auto, again cleared my head of everything I know of photography, walked back outside, took another shot of Tubby. Admittedly the sun was out at that stage, which did give the lens a slight advantage over the kit lens, but as you can see from this image, we're already starting to get a better sharpness, better colour, better contrast, and that's with the camera, as I say, in full auto. So that's the first recommendation, is just to go out and get a lens that's going to not be a bottleneck for your camera in the same way that the kit lens will be. It'll open up the potential of your camera, albeit without giving you the convenience of a zoom. The second thing that I'm going to recommend, and this is where it gets slightly technical, is that you take the camera out of the full auto mode and put it into what we call Aperture Priority mode on a Canon that's signified by the AV. Most cameras will include an A somewhere in the relevant selection on the camera. Now what Aperture Priority mode is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to take control of the blurring of the background. Now as soon as you put the camera into AV mode, you should see on the display on the back of the camera that there's a number preceded by an F, which should now be highlighted, and by rotating the relevant dial on your camera, and on a Canon camera it's found just here behind the shutter release button, by rotating that dial you can increase and reduce that F number. Now the F doesn't stand for focus, but it might help you to think of it in that way. So the smaller you make that number by rotating the dial, the smaller the amount of your image is actually going to be in focus, and therefore the blurrier the background is going to be, and if there's anything in the foreground in front of the subject, that will also be blurred more by reducing the F number. So just to illustrate the point, I'm going to rotate the dial on the back of my camera to bring that F number down to 1.8. This being an f1.8 lens, that's the lowest number that I'm going to be able to get this down to, and that's the maximum that I can blur the background by. And when I go out and take another shot of Tubby with the camera set to an aperture of f1.8, this is the result that I get. Tubby's head is in focus, but her back and her tail are out of focus, and the background is also out of focus. Now this can be a nice look, as I mentioned in my previous video, it's a nice look for portraits because those unpleasant distracting backgrounds can be blurred so that we can draw the attention of the person looking at the photo to the subject, the thing that we want them to focus on, rather than being distracted by a potentially messy background. However, if we zoom in to this image, we can see that the focus is not quite where we want it to be. Now, if you're taking a photo of a person or an animal, as a general rule, you should try to have the camera focus on the closest eye to the camera. But in this case, the camera has chosen to focus on the two hairs that are effectively Tubby's eyebrows, and her eye is actually slightly out of focus. This is how shallow our focus field is. It's what we call the depth of field. And when we dial this lens down to f1.8, we're only dealing with, potentially, depending on how close we are to our subject, it might just be a few millimeters of our image that's actually in sharp focus, and anything slightly behind that or in front of it will be out of focus. So by allowing the camera to choose the focus point, we're not quite achieving the image that we want to achieve. Now, the other benefit of putting the camera in aperture priority mode is it now gives us the ability to override the camera's automatic focusing process. So to take control of where the camera focuses, we need to find a button that looks something like this one here. On the back of a Canon camera, it tends to be on the top right, and if we hit that button there, we see on the camera's display a bunch of points which represent the focusing points of our camera. Now, by default, the camera will choose the center focus point, and you can use that center focus point. That's not a problem. If this is getting too technical, when you look through the viewfinder, you'll see something like this, and if you half press your shutter, you should see that that central focus point will light up red. And as long as you place that central focus point over the thing that you want to focus on, in the case of Tubby it's her eye, so half press, the camera will probably beep, and the little focus point through the viewfinder will flash to indicate that it's locked to focus, and then a full press on the shutter button will take the photo. And as long as that red dot is over the thing that you want to focus on, you should get a nice sharply focused image on the thing that you want to focus on. Now, the problem is we don't always want the thing that we're focusing on to be smack bang in the center of the photo. So by pushing that button on the top right hand corner of the camera, we can then use the buttons on the back of the camera to move that red dot to a different focus point. Now, in this case, I've moved it across to the left and up. I've then looked through my viewfinder, I've placed that red dot on Tubby's eye and taken the shot again. Now, you'll notice if we zoom into this picture that the camera has correctly focused on Tubby's eye and not on her eyebrow, so we get the nice sharp focus where we want it. The other thing you'll notice is that I've recomposed the shot by crouching down more towards Tubby's eye level, and that gives a much more pleasing, natural viewing angle onto Tubby, and hence a much nicer composition for the shot. Now, composition encompasses lots of different things. It's how far your camera is from the ground, it's where you position the camera relative to the subject, what angle are you coming in at from, and what does that then place in the background. Can we shift our position to give a more pleasing background? Are we better to moving closer to our subject or move further away? These are all things that you need to be considering when you're taking your shot. Now, if you're taking a photo of a person, it's nice and easy because they will move for you into a different position so that you can make sure you've got a nice pleasing background. But with cats, they tend not to be quite so compliant. So you're going to have to do the moving, maybe try and encourage the animal to move, or just have a lot of patience and wait until the animal is in a place that's going to give you a nice appealing shot like this one. And in this photo, I'm bringing together composition, the photos taken from Tubby's eye level, as you can see. I've got a nice pleasing background, some nice green foliage. In the foreground I've got more foliage, which gives the photo a nice almost three-dimensional look to it. I'm in Aperture Priority mode with a nice lens that will drop to a low f number, which gives me the ability to dial down that f number to get a nice shallow depth of field. So whilst Tubby's eye is in nice sharp focus in this shot, you'll notice that the foliage in the foreground and in the background are both out of focus. So with this last shot there's also an element of patience, because I had to wait until the cat was in a nice position, the light was just falling nicely onto her face, and in this particular photo everything just came together nicely. So just to recap, we've very quickly covered using a better lens, switching to Aperture Priority mode, which is the mode that I use probably 90% of the time, as do most professionals if they're honest. Dialing down our f number to give us a nice shallow depth of field, and taking control of where the camera focuses. The final thing that will also make a massive difference to your photos, if you're comfortable with a computer, is to get your hands on some free photo editing software. Picasa is one example, and editing can make a huge difference. It can make an okay photo look really quite good. It's not going to make a terrible photo look good, but if we go back to that first photo of Tubby now, which as you know was washed out, a little bit blurred, with just a couple of minutes in photo editing software we can make it into something half reasonable like this. But a better illustration would be this photo, which I took at a wedding a few months ago. Now the original photo is not one of my best, because I was having to work very quickly to try and catch the bride and groom just as they were about to kiss. I didn't have time to move my focus point around. The camera was set to the central focus point, so I had to keep the bride and groom smack bang in the middle of the frame just to get that photo off quickly. And there's a lot of other problems with this photo. Some of the dark areas, like the fountain on the right there, are way too dark and all of the details lost there. The sky is a lot brighter than we would like it to be. As I mentioned, the composition is not great at all. We can get a much more pleasing composition often by moving our subject away from the centre. Now I don't want to go too deeply into composition at this stage, but if I show you the edited photo, you can see that it looks almost like a completely different photo. And this was done with a piece of software called Lightroom, which is very popular with professionals, particularly any professionals who are needing to quickly edit hundreds or even thousands of photos, like wedding photographers for example. It's not an expensive piece of software. I think it costs roughly £50 in the UK, so it's not going to break the bank if you decide to go down the Lightroom route. As I mentioned, there is free software that's going to cost you absolutely nothing, which is absolutely fine for editing smaller numbers of photos. But just coming back to the before and after with this wedding shot, you can see that I've done a number of things. I've cropped the image, so I've chopped off part of the left and right of the image. I have darkened the sky to bring out some of the detail in the clouds. I've brought up the exposure of the fountain to the right there. I've boosted the contrast, sharpened it a little. I've rotated the image slightly to give it a more dynamic look. And all those things together, as you can see, can make a really quite average looking image look, well, to my eye at least, really quite nice. So professional photographers do cheat a little bit with software. You should try to get as much right in camera as possible. An image can only be modified so far in software before it starts to look horribly unnatural and processed. So this video has covered the 5 main points that I think will help you with your photography when you've got plenty of light to work with. Shooting in low light is a whole different ball game, so my next video will cover low light photography, including flash photography, which is something that can take a while to master. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this and it was useful, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.